Hi there, good afternoon. My name is Cheyenne. It has come to my attention that you, as a client, are wanting to transport goods from Colombos, Sri Lanka from Normandy, France. As discussed, the goods that you are wanting to be transported is a cargo of cheese that weighs around 1 ton. So I'm here to discuss to you the way that we'll package your goods and why, as well as discussing the mode of transportation, so whether we'll be using ocean or air transportation and the reasons to why we've chosen that. As well as this, I'll discuss to you the risks that we might overcome when choosing that certain mode of transportation and how we can minimize those risks from actually happening. And lastly, I'll briefly discuss to you the different quarantine requirements and regulations that you, as a client, might need to overcome when transporting goods to Sri Lanka. So firstly, with packaging, you have told me that you are wanting to transport a semi-hard cheese known as cheddar. So to package your goods, we'll be using wooden boxes which will be placed onto pallets into a cargo container. There are three functions, one of the main functions of packaging is that we need to protect the goods during transportation, for example using bubble wrap. In this instance, we'll be using plastic film, aluminium or tin foil to protect your goods throughout the transportation period. So, as mentioned before, we will be placing them into wooden boxes and then onto pallets into a cargo container. This is usually because cheese is usually transported in cartons, but we will be transporting your goods in a whole container known as a full container load, known as FCL. The reason for why the goods will be transported in a FCL is because it has been stated that the goods requiring refrigeration make up another category of cargo that demands particular care and specialized packaging services. So this shows that refrigerated goods really need to travel alone and not to be mixed with other goods. As your goods are cheese, we need to refrigerate containers. We need to use refrigerated containers, also known as a reefer. Your goods will be placed into a refrigerated container that is self-powered or would be powered through the ship's electrical system. As your cheese is usually coated with a wax layer to help protect the cheese, this means in the cargo container, air circulation needs to be present to keep the product fresh as possible. So this is done by the goods being placed on shelves, allowing enough space between the walls to facilitate your air circulation, which will prevent spoilage to your goods. We also need to consider markings on your wooden boxes / crates. So these markings on the box let people know how to handle the goods and what sort of goods are in the box. So the markings that we will be using will be like keep dry, this way up, keep away from heat, and handle with care. Alongside these markings, we will also mark how much each box weighs, where the product is coming from, and the destination that it needs to go to, and the order number. So that is essentially how we'll package your goods to Sri Lanka. So secondly, I'll talk to you now about transportation. So in regards to transportation, there are many ways to transport your goods to Colombo, Sri Lanka, but the main transportation that I've chosen is to use ocean transportation. As well as this, we also need to consider road and rail transportation, as the cheese is coming from the farm and that needs to be transported to the port, and then once it's been ocean delivered to Sri Lanka, we will need to transport from the port to the restaurant in Sri Lanka. So, in regards to the railway and road transportation, so France is known to have generally good conditions, so especially the motorways or auto routes. This illustrates that transporting goods via road and rail will not be an issue, as trucks carrying the goods will have an easy pathway to get to the port. There is alternatives though. If the truck was to break down, we would have a replacement truck that can come to the location, and we can load the goods back up onto the replacement truck, and then it can go on its way to the port. So the port that your goods will be going to will be called Cherbourg Port, which is located in Normandy, France. Once the goods have arrived safely to the port, these will then be loaded into the cargo containers known as FCL, known as your full container load, and these goods will need to be refrigerated and will have very specific handling instructions, and therefore will travel alone on the ship. So, as I did mention before, the main transportation will be via ocean transportation. The reason to why this transportation was considered over air transportation is due to many factors. So the two main factors that were considered were the cost and the capacity. So it is said that air transportation is relatively expensive compared to ocean transportation. So I took that into consideration and thought that we could save more money using ocean transportation. But not only this, the capacity is also another factor, as exporting a cargo of cheese that weighs about 1 ton not necessarily can fit into an aircraft, as capacity is limited. So cargo ships generally can carry really massive amounts of cargo, and also they can store a lot of them at once, which means that competitive rates are high and they can service large demands with ease. So since the goods that we are exporting weigh about 1 ton, this is the best option to use ocean transportation, as the ships can store a lot of containers at once. And another factor that made me choose ocean transportation was sustainability. So as environmental protection is becoming an issue all over around the world, every business needs to consider the environmental factor so they can see how they can contribute to a sustainable future. So since environmental issues are becoming more aware all around the world, this can affect the way the public may look at you as a company or a business. So these factors will illustrate why ocean transportation is suited for the exporting of your goods to Sri Lanka. And again, once the goods arrive in Port Colombo, Sri Lanka, they will then be transferred again using road transportation to get to the final destination. This will be done using trucks, which will hold the containers of goods. Although Sri Lanka is known for bad traffic and poor road conditions such as potholes, narrow roads and congestion, this can be an issue using road transportation. But this is basically the main transportation that we'll be using to get your goods to the restaurant. So if there were to be any problems from the port to the restaurant in Sri Lanka, again, there is an alternative where we can again use replacement trucks if they were to break down or have a punctured tyre from hitting a pothole. So that is the main mode of transportation that we'll be using, which was, again, ocean transportation. So now I'll be discussing to you what sort of risks that we might overcome choosing that mode of transportation. So One risk that needs to be considered is if something was to go wrong with the ship, this can cause the delivery time to be delayed. So if your time management is strict and you need your goods to be delivered by a specific day, this can be a risk when choosing ocean transportation. In regards to that, the way that we can minimize that risk might be a bit hard to minimize, but ocean transportation is quite strong, so nothing ever really happens when it comes to ocean transportation. If that was to happen, usually they might have a replacement ship that would come by at one of the ports that it has stopped by and get your goods transported onto the replacement ship. So another risk that can be considered is the loss and damage of the goods on board. This usually can be minimized by purchasing cargo insurance that can cover the costs of the damaged goods or lost goods. For example, if you were to use the Chubb Group as an insurance company, but me as being your freight forwarder, this insurance is usually covered anyway, so you don't need to worry about insurance if your goods were to be damaged or lost. Another risk is the risk of poor refrigeration when transporting your goods. This can be an issue as this can damage the goods being transported. So in order to minimize and prevent this from happening, we usually write up a cooling order, which is obtained by the consignor before loading is begun. This order is usually compiled with during the entire transport chain. So not only this, refrigerated goods are usually temperature controlled throughout the journey anyways during your ocean transportation to make sure that your goods are still fresh and long lasting. These main risks do need to be measured when choosing ocean transportation, though there are so many ways to minimize these risks from happening, which I have discussed to you. So, as mentioned before, I'm going to briefly discuss to you the quarantine requirements and regulations to transporting your goods to another country. So one document that needs to be completed is called a commercial invoice. This is one document that needs to be created by the exporter and to be submitted to the importer. So usually a commercial invoice is a record or evidence of the transaction between the exporter and importer, and once the goods are available, the exporter issues a commercial invoice to the importer in order to charge him/her for the goods. This invoice usually just contains basic information on the transaction and is always required for customs to clear your goods. Another main transportation document that you may need is a bill of lading, is a document. This document usually is issued by the shipping company to confirm that your goods have been received on board. It also serves a proof of receipt that the shipper is obliged to deliver your goods to the consignee. Along with the bill lading document, there are also freight documents that need to be considered, which we can discuss further later. These include like your roadway bill and railway bill, considering we're going to be using road transportation and rail transportation as well. These main documents are the main documents that need to be considered when exporting from France, which is your destination that you are exporting from. Another quick document that needs to be required is a VAT registration. This document is usually for the exporters and importers again. And as well as this, you also need a cargo examination form that needs to be present for customs to check your cargo containers containing your goods, to just double check that everything is still sealed properly, that there's no been cross contamination, and etc. once all these goods have gone through customs, the cargo containers have been checked. A goods received note is then documented and signed by the exporter and importer to just justify and declare that your goods have arrived safely and are in perfect condition. So I hope that what I've discussed to you has helped you know what it is like to transport your goods from another country. So thank you for listening.